Rain-soaked clouds hovered over Riverside Academy like a warning that no one bothered to interpret, least of all the school's notorious tormentor, Jason Hale, whose swagger echoed down the hallways long before he appeared. And that day, the entire campus buzzed with whispers about the new girl, Aria Dawson, a quiet transfer student with ocean blue eyes and a strange calmness about her that unsettled people in ways they couldn't describe. And while most students simply stared from a distance, Jason walked towards her like a predator who had found unexpected prey, mocking the way she held her notebook close to her chest, calling her pondweed, and bragging loudly to his friends that he would show her how things worked around here. But Aria didn't react. She simply gave him a measured, unsettling look, as though she already knew what he would do long before he did it. And that expression irritated Jason enough to escalate things beyond the usual teasing, because proving dominance was something he thrived on, something that fed the hollow part of him he never admitted existed. And so after class, when the students were heading toward the backfield for a biology trip near the nature reserve pond, Jason's mind sparked with a cruel idea he could already hear his friends cheering about. A place every student knew was filled with piranhas used for the school's controlled ecological study, a place fenced off with bright yellow warning signs. And as the group gathered around the instructor, Jason sneaked behind Aria, whispering mockingly, "Hope you can swim, new girl," and before anyone could process what was happening, he shoved her hard straight toward the rotting wooden edge of the restricted pond, her arms flailing before she plunged into the dark water with a splash that froze everyone in place, the teacher screaming Jason's name, students gasping, some laughing nervously, but silence consumed the area the moment fin after fin broke the surface as the piranhas swarmed. Yet instead of panic, instead of screams, Aria submerged and disappeared beneath the rippling surface so completely that it felt supernatural, and Jason smirked as the teacher raced to call security, the students yelling for help. But that smirk vanished when a strange, glowing ripple spiraled across the water, and suddenly Aria rose, not attacked, not bleeding, but standing on the shallow ridge like the water itself was parting for her eyes no longer calm but fiercely luminous, the piranhas circling her feet like obedient guardians instead of predators. And every student stumbled backward at the impossible sight, while Jason's face drained of color as Aria stepped out of the water completely untouched, lifting her sleeve to reveal an ancient-looking tattoo shaped like twisting waves and fanged fish, a mark that seemed to shimmer like living ink. And her voice echoed with a depth that didn't belong to any ordinary 16-year-old girl as she said, "You should never throw someone into a home that listens to me." And at that moment the piranhas surged upward in synchronized movement, their bodies slapping against the surface as though answering her command, and Jason stumbled away, terrified, but the ground beneath him was muddy and slick, causing him to slip and fall backward right toward the edge where the wooden board cracked under his weight, and before he could stand, the water churned, bubbles rising violently, piranhas gathering to the surface as if waiting for her order, and Jason screamed for mercy, tears streaking down his face, trembling and begging as Aria calmly approached him, each step making the pond swell behind her like a living tide. And the entire school watched as the bully who had ruled Riverside Academy for years now lay helpless and shaking at the feet of the girl he tried to destroy, a girl who clearly wasn't ordinary, a girl whose connection to the water carried a power none of them understood. And as Aria crouched beside him, the piranhas inching closer, she whispered so quietly that only he could hear it, "You pushed me into danger to humiliate me, now you will understand what it feels like to face something you cannot control." And the moment she raised her hand, everyone thought she would let the creatures take him, but instead she let the piranhas stop inches away, hovering like a wall of razor teeth holding back, leaving Jason shaking uncontrollably, overwhelmed by pure fear. And she finished, "Mercy is given to those who learn, this is your lesson," before turning away, the pond settling instantly as though the water itself bowed to her, while Jason curled into himself, sobbing, humiliated, and forever changed by the terrifying truth that he had bullied someone who held power far beyond anything he could comprehend. The fallout of that day spread through Riverside Academy like a storm that refused to pass, with students whispering about Aria as though she were some mythical being, teachers avoiding questions they couldn't answer, and Jason, once the untouchable king of cruelty, now walking through hallways with lowered shoulders, jumpy eyes, and a fear that seeped so deeply into him he jolted at the sound of water fountains turning on, because nightmares of piranhas circling him every night left him trembling, replaying that moment when Aria stood above him like an ancient guardian of the waters. And though the school suspended him for the dangerous stunt, the real punishment came from within, manifesting his terror he couldn't shake. And when he returned to school, no one bothered to greet him, not even his former friends who were too shaken to stand by someone who could provoke such a supernatural wrath. So Jason did everything he could to avoid Aria, switching hall routes, skipping classes, even eating alone in the far corner of the cafeteria. But fate had its own path, and one afternoon during rainfall, the sound that reminded him too much of the pond, he found himself trapped inside the old greenhouse, the thunder booming as water dripped through the broken roof, and suddenly the door creaked open, revealing Aria standing in the entrance, her presence radiating an energy that sent chills down his spine. And though she didn't look angry, her calmness was somehow even more intimidating, prompting Jason to fall to his knees instantly, crying, apologizing, begging her not to hurt him. But Aria stepped closer, her voice soft but unwavering as she said, "You think I want revenge? That's your fear talking. You were willing to throw me to death for entertainment. You hurt people because you think no one will stand up to you, but the world isn't built around your power. Sometimes it fights back, and as lightning flashed behind her, the water dripping from the ceiling began forming patterns, swirling at her feet as though magnetized by her presence, the droplets rising into the air like tiny shimmering spheres that danced around her hands, and Jason screamed, convinced she was about to unleash something terrifying, but instead, Aria exhaled slowly and let the water fall harmlessly, saying, "I don't want you to fear me. I want you to change," and with that, she stepped aside and allowed him to leave, but Jason, overwhelmed and trembling, remained on his knees, whispering that he deserved whatever punishment she decided, yet Aria only shook her head, replying, "Punishment doesn't fix the world, growth does," and as she turned to leave, Jason realized that the girl he once mocked held not only supernatural power but more humanity than he ever had, and the guilt consumed him so intensely that he vowed to make things right, starting the very next day by apologizing publicly in front of the entire school, his voice shaking as he admitted everything he had done, while Aria watched from the crowd, expression unreadable but calm, and as weeks passed, Jason transformed, becoming quieter, more respectful, even protective of those he once tormented, but the most unexpected shift was how students began gravitating toward Aria, not because they feared her, but because her strength, mysterious yet controlled, gave off a sense of safety, as though she were someone who could face darkness without being swallowed by it, and as the story of the pond incident grew into a campus legend whispered to every new student, Aria remained the quiet, powerful force who reminded everyone that cruelty had consequences, compassion had power, and sometimes the world chose its defenders in the most unexpected ways, and for the viewers watching this story unfold, remember this: strength isn't in hurting others, true strength comes from rising above, from choosing growth over revenge, and from supporting those who stand alone, just like Aria did. And if you want more gripping stories like this, stories filled with power, consequences, and transformation, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because your support helps us bring more unbelievable, emotional, and epic tales to life.